everyone, I'm Marissa Kobe with Amazing Profit Media. We're here today in Dublin, Ireland in our Amazing.com office, and I have with me Mark Quick, the founder of both Nathan Whiskey Company and Ninth Impact Gaming Studios. Thanks for joining me, Mark.
You're welcome.
To get started, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I was an engineer originally, specializing in software, and worked with some big software companies for a while, and left one of those to found my own software startup here in Dublin. That was back in 2009, and we grew that business. It was software as a service. We sold the software online to large procurement teams who were buying goods and services and sourcing. And so we got investment, grew that company, sold it in 2012. And since then, I've been involved in 2 startup ventures with 2 different teams. One of them is a boutique whiskey distillery in the west of Ireland, specializing in making whiskey the way it used to be made. So handcrafting casks, growing local barley, and making a really special whiskey. The other is completely different. It's a games development studio, and we build games for mobile phones and publish to the App Store and Google Play Store.
How did software bring you to whiskey and games?
I suppose it's an accident of history and networks. During the years when I was building that software startup, I came across a wide variety of people through that business, kept in touch with them, and one of them was a professor of procurement out in one of the universities. And so after I had sold the software company, he knew that I was now free to maybe do something else, and he approached me about starting a whiskey distillery, which he had been thinking about with his wife, who was a food production manager. So the team started to form together. So this team formed, and I guess from there we started developing and growing the business. So that was kind of how I got into the whiskey business, I guess.
And did your software gaming come in later then?
So around the same time myself, I've been developing and designing games since, as a passion since I was a small child, back in the days of ZX Spectrum, which is a really old sort of computer. It sounds really old these days. So back in the 80s, I would have been developing small games, and that would have stayed with me all the way. And then a few years back, again, a different team formed. One of the guys who I had been working with in the software startup, he was interested in developing more games. His background was in the art and the graphic arts, and we teamed up with another programmer, and so that small team of 3, we started developing more professional games, I guess, and that company grew from kind of an operation that happened in our living room, at evenings and weekends, into a more substantial company then. So we employ 7 people in a gaming studio now, and we've published 3 games, one of which was the official Biker Mice from Mars game.
Oh, yeah.
Based on the TV series from the 1990s. We were fortunate enough to win the contract to develop the official game, which we did just very recently. It's out on the App Store since just before Christmas.
That's really, really cool that you managed to be able to follow 2 passions at once. So what's the hiring process like for each of these teams then?
Yeah, so the core teams in both situations are shareholders themselves in the company. So they're as passionate about the company as I am. And then from that core team who are owners, we also have other employees. And so they tend to be, the early employees. So they're also really passionate about the business because it's seen as a risk to join a smaller startup enterprise than taking maybe a job in a very large established organization. But that really appeals to a certain type of person. So the first thing that we try to qualify with anybody who approaches us, or anybody we find that could potentially be an employee of our company, is what type of person they are. Because if you've got someone who is used to operating in large organizations and maybe is comfortable there, it can be a difficult journey to be in a startup. And I've seen it a couple of times in the past where we've mishired somebody. They come in with the expectation of things running like a large organization and maybe are a bit shocked to find how startups operate, which could be viewed as a lot more chaotic, I guess. There's a lot more demands in areas that there mightn't be specialists in. There's a lot more problem solving that you have to go and find a way to do things in startups quite often that you mightn't have ever done or ever encountered before, and that's just the nature of startups. So we tend to try and find out if the person would be right for the startup, and then obviously we qualify them in their technical abilities or whatever the role is.
So how do you stay organized then with all this chaos that can happen with one startup and you've got two?
Yeah, so I guess the only reason, as I said, that I can do it is because we have such good teams operating in both. I guess my role allows that to happen quite naturally. So, a lot of my time will be spent in Dublin, maybe in the US. So it allows my schedule to get pretty planned in advance. And then I have a couple of free days which are kind of open for that list of absolutely other tasks that have to be done. And I guess the other thing is, honestly, is that it's 24/7, a couple of hours of sleep, but it gives us a lot of hours in the week to complete tasks in both. So, that's the nature of quite a lot of startups. And my wife has made me promise that, there's an end to that in sight after a couple of years when the businesses are more established. And I went through that with my last startup as well. It was very time intensive at the start. And as we got more employees, more customers, as the business grew and we got some more organization in place, the demands can decrease, and then you can get back to a somewhat normal life.
That marketing that you're talking about, your audiences for your gaming company versus your whiskey company would be completely different. How do you find out which is your ideal customer for both?
Yeah, so in both companies, we share a philosophy or an approach to market research, in that we try to create small test cases. So if we are making assumptions of who our target customer is, we try and test that out. So we try and see if we can create a scenario where we can present them with a proposition, and then we take all the data of, did we convert this group of people, and we also take different groups of people than the opposite. So when we're creating one of our games, the Biker Mice from Mars game, our original assumption was that people would be familiar with the TV series and they would love to play the game. But throughout our testing, we knew that was our assumption, so we picked people who were completely unfamiliar with the TV series, and we tested the app with these people. And we found that the conversion rates were incredibly similar. So our original assumption that this would be a game just for existing fans was completely wrong, because it was just as applicable to people who had never seen the TV show. So that informed how we built the game. So we were a lot more conscious of explaining everything from the start, so that if you came to the app, you didn't need to have any pre-existing knowledge. You could actually learn the story as you played along. So it was really important that we set up that small experiment and got the learnings from it.
When you started in the whiskey business, you mentioned that this is something completely different than the way that the other whiskey companies do it. Did you pursue it that way because that's what you were passionate about as well, like your customers, or because you saw that as an opportunity to differentiate yourself?
So it was a passion that we wanted to create. So I guess we looked at the existing sort of brand, and we were unhappy as whiskey drinkers ourselves and as whiskey lovers, both myself and the two other directors, our CEO, Dr. Paul Davis, and Jude Davis. We had a passion for the smaller, more authentic scotches. So we looked at existing Scotch brands that we really, really liked. And we saw that this wasn't being necessarily provided, a similar sort of product wasn't available in Irish whiskey. And as we kind of look back over the history of Irish whiskey, it was very, very common in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And through a whole series of complicated histories, it's not common today. So we really had a passion to start doing things like start making whiskey the way whiskey used to be made. And so we were determined to do that. So the next question really for us was, if we did that, would that appeal to anybody else? So that was the fundamental question at the start of the business, is that we definitely want to do it, but we would never go ahead with something like that until we, were sure that that would appeal to somebody else and that they would actually purchase the product at the end of it. So it was a passion initially, but we definitely, before we started on a long, large investment road, there was a huge amount of work of making sure that somebody else also wanted this, and that's the market. So I think you have to do that with every product, not move ahead with it yourself just because you would like to do this. It's a great starting point, but finding out who else is like you, and knowing that market is really important before you make any big decisions like allocating some resources to it.
How did you test to see if there was interest in it like yours?
Yeah, so we went through a huge amount of prototyping. So we created small batches, and we found ways to test this with consumers. So live on-premise tests, we'd make people test these. We also created the brand really early. So we created our brand image, our brand background, and our story, and we presented to people why we were doing this. And then the real test at the end of it was, would people who heard that story, would they actually put their money where their mouth was and purchase, part of this story? Because our certificates of ownerships of our first bottles are retail for €150. So that's quite a lot higher than purchasing a bottle of whiskey off the shelf for €20. So it shows a really high commitment to the story and to what we're trying to create. So that was a key metric for us. So anybody else who's in a business, before they sort of commit, if they're sourcing internationally, if they can find a way to do it on a really small scale, purchase a couple of these, and it doesn't matter if you sell them at a loss. You can purchase them for any price, because really what you're just trying to do is seeing if you can sell these and who do you sell them to and why are they buying them. And if you get to understand that, you'll make a lot better decisions as you scale the business.
This story that you're telling, it's a really intriguing one. How would you recommend other people share their stories to get investors to buy into it as well?
Yeah, so it can be done in absolutely any business if you approach it in that way. You create an early product. So whatever that product is, it might be the perfect product. It might be, some sort of a way that you've managed to prototype your real product that you're going for. So some sort of an early way that you can get a product fast, or if you're sourcing, instead of sourcing a huge quantity in bulk and getting low prices, source a couple of them or low quantity. Forget about the price, because if you don't make profit or you just break even, this is really just your test case, So keep the commitment levels small and forget about profit at this stage, because you know that if this test is successful, you can source the big quantities at a different price. So you know what price you can source at. So test it out, get a small quantity or an early product somehow, and then go to your target market and try out, present this to them through different channels. And whoever you think your market is, try and present the same thing through different channels to other target markets as well. So it's testing if you're actually correct in your assumptions. And from my experience, I'm wrong more often, or as often as I'm right. And it's great to know either way, because it's very hard to predict sometimes. So trying this product with different target markets and through different channels. So it's really interesting to find out, if you can sell this to people in person, if you can sell it to them online. Is there a difference to how your message is coming across, and is there a difference to your conversion rates? Can you sell it through a third party? And again, how does that affect, how does the channel affect the end result? And so after doing all of these small tests and spending some time doing this, you'll have a huge amount of knowledge, and you'll have a huge amount learned, and then you can start to think about, large quantities and investment in creating a scalable product.
As you're learning all these different lessons and as you're proceeding through your third now company, how has your life changed as your story continues?
I suppose it gets busier, and it has been busy for quite a number of years. So I guess that's the main difference in my life. I also tend to be in a huge amount of different locations at a lot of different events. So I would be at some game events, some whiskey tastings in the evening. I find myself speaking about whiskey more often because people ask me to come and talk and give whiskey tasting sessions. So it's something I really enjoy. So I get to do an amazing variety of different things in my day-to-day life. So I guess that's how it's changed, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing a bit of your very busy schedule with us. I appreciate it.
You're more than welcome.